There are certain careers that if you grew up African, you probably heard about very early. Medicine, law, engineering, something respectable, something stable, something that when someone asks your parents what their child is studying, they can say it with their full chest. But let a 17-year-old say, I want to make music. Suddenly, the conversation switches into a very practical one. What exactly are you going to do with that? You can do that one on the side. Go and study something serious first. Or the classic, get a real job. We listen to the music, we watch the films, we wear the clothes, we celebrate our actors, musicians, designers, and filmmakers when they make it internationally. I've been thinking a lot about this contradiction because I don't think African families altogether hate creativity. It is economic reasons, education reasons, ideas about class and respectability. There is fear, and some of that fear is completely understandable. But there is also something deeply strange about a society celebrating creative success once somebody has beaten the odds, but at the same time trying to make that decision feel irresponsible in the first place. So I want to know, what happens to all the talent that never gets far enough for us to find out what it could have become? I remember this hierarchy being very obvious when I was in secondary school in Nigeria. In senior school, you had science students, art students, and commercial students. And whether anyone explicitly said it or not, there was always this feeling that science students were the really smart ones. If you were doing physics, chemistry, biology, further mathematics, there was always a seriousness attached to that. Arts and commercial students could obviously be very intelligent too, but it didn't always carry the same prestige. And I find that interesting now because what we were learning wasn't just that different people are good at different things, we were also learning that some kind of abilities count more than others. Someone being exceptional at mathematics is proof of intelligence. Someone being exceptional at storytelling, composition, illustration, performance, filmmaking, design, or sports can sometimes be described as talented. And talented does sound complimentary, but notice the difference. Intelligence often sounds like something you build a future around, while talent sounds like something you could do after homework. Now, I'm not saying every Nigerian school operates the same way that mine did, but research does support the point that family expectations and social context can meaningfully shape the careers young people imagine as available to them. And this made me wonder why specific professions became so much more than professions in the first place. Because when a parent says, my daughter is going to medical school, they're not necessarily only talking about the medicine. They might also be talking about the security, the status, a future they recognize. And once you look at it that way, the fear around creative careers starts making a lot more sense. I think conversations like this become unfair when we pretend everybody has the same amount of freedom to take risks. For a wealthy family, a child saying, I want to try making music for a few years might just be an experiment. For a family already struggling financially, that same decision can feel terrifying because a career isn't just what one child does for the rest of their life. It could also be an entire family quietly hoping that education will create the stability they never had before. Sub-Saharan Africa still carries a disproportionate amount of global extreme poverty. The World Bank reported that in 2024, the region represented around 16% of the world's population, but 67% of people living in extreme poverty. So imagine telling a parent who has spent their life trying to keep their family afloat, your child is really talented. Let them follow their passions and see what happens. Okay, and if that doesn't happen, who pays for the equipment? Who pays for the training? Who funds the years where very little money is coming in? What happens if there is no scholarship? Those questions change what follow your dreams mean. And I really want to acknowledge that because otherwise this video becomes African families are so backwards, just support your children. That's not it. I understand why people become risk averse when the consequences of risk are high. And if you have grown up or are growing up in an economy where opportunities are scarce and there isn't much of a a safety net underneath you, choosing predictability could be an act of survival. Because the bargain was basically this: don't gamble on the uncertain thing. Get the degree. Choose the serious profession. Then at least you will have stability. But young Africans are entering job markets where opportunities simply aren't growing quick enough to take in everybody looking for them. The World Bank reported in 2025 that around 1 million young Africans enter the job markets every month, while formal employment opportunities remain scarce. I'm not saying degrees are useless, and I'm not saying medicine, law, or whatever is suddenly a terrible career either. The point is simply that the relationship between good degree, good job, financial security is no longer as automatic as the cultural advice makes it sound. So now you can have somebody that gave up the thing that they were genuinely gifted at because it was considered unstable, only to graduate into instability anyway. Because what exactly did they sacrifice their talent for? Also, and this is why I think we put way too much on families. Even if every parent or carer suddenly became supportive tomorrow, okay, then what? Your mom and dad cannot build film studios, sports facilities, or an entire labor market. Nigeria's own Federal Creative Economy Plan talks about skills, intellectual property protection, and job creation. So maybe get a real job isn't just an attitude people randomly came up with. I think it's what people learn when some careers have an obvious path in front of them and others just don't. Africa's creative industries are not imaginary little side hobbies. UNESCO and the EU are currently working with countries on policies to strengthen cultural and creative industries, including issues such as youth employment, intellectual property rights, and professionalization. Which is interesting because at an institutional level, we are recognizing, oh, these things are industries. Music employs people, films employ people, fashion employs people, gaming employs people.
You can get signed into a team as a gamer and that team pays you. So it's basically a contract for you to play.
But culturally, it can still feel as though the only creative career we respect is the one that has already succeeded. Once somebody becomes Thames, Ira Star, Black Coffee, a celebrated filmmaker, or internationally recognized artist, their career suddenly makes perfect sense. Of course they should have pursued it. Look how successful they are. But the celebrity status is a terrible way to judge whether an industry is legitimate. UNESCO's 2026 report found that globally, around 40% of workers in these industries earn below their national minimum wage, while informality, unstable working conditions, and gaps between education and industry remain serious problems. So when families say this career looks unstable, sometimes, and this might be a little bit controversial, but they're right. The question I'm more interested in is, why is instability treated as an inherent feature of creative talent rather than a problem worth fixing? I saw a TikTok recently that brought me to tears.
When I grow up, my heart desire then is running. I run very well. So I don't have the opportunity. So I have to change my desire. Say, let me start selling markets so I can use it to help myself in future. I have my certificate for sports. It's at my children look at me. They say, Mommy, you run very well. What happened? I say, that is where Nigeria keep me. I use this little now to support myself.
That story hits me really hard because the sad part is not she definitely would have become an Olympian. We do not know that. Maybe she would have. Maybe she wouldn't have. The sad part is that she never got the opportunity to find out. Her children can look at the physical evidence and see that their mom was exceptionally good at something. There is a first half of the story, the competitions, the medals, the potential, but there isn't a second half. And obviously, sports and creative industries are not exactly the same thing, but they share something really important. Talent does not turn itself into a career. Talent needs somewhere to go. A gifted runner needs coaching, facilities, competitions, and funding. A filmmaker needs equipment, training, crews, places to exhibit work, and people willing to fund films. A musician needs somewhere to rehearse, record, perform, and eventually earn. But without that ecosystem, telling somebody just just follow your passions is really not that useful. The issue is not that Africa lacks talented people. We obviously very clearly do not. The issue is that too many talented people have historically lacked reliable pathways for turning ability into an ordinary life, not celebrity or international superstardom, just a job, a living, a career. When we talk about whether a creative career works, we immediately imagine the biggest person within that lane, a globally famous actor, an Olympic athlete. But when somebody says they want to study accounting, nobody responds, well, you're probably not going to become the richest accountant in Africa, so what's the point? Obviously, because we understand that a profession does not need to turn everybody into a superstar to be legitimate. There are ordinary accountants, doctors, lawyers, people who are not famous but are trained, employed, and able to build lives around those skills. So I don't think a measure of a healthy creative industry should be in how many global superstars it produces. It should be whether an ordinary person can become a cinematographer, an editor, a sound engineer, a dancer, and live. Right now, we only talk about creative success as if there are only two options: global superstar or unemployed dreamer. And I think there should be an enormous amount of life between those two things. Which takes me back to education. UNESCO is now explicitly arguing that education and skills systems need to become better aligned because curricula often lag behind what those sectors actually need. The ideal is not school or talent. Those two things should be able to develop together. Creative industries can be unstable. There is also exploitation, and there are people who have spent years pursuing something that never becomes financially sustainable. And not everybody with a talent needs to turn it into a career either. Some things can remain hobbies, that's fine. I for one can play the ukulele. I don't think I'm gonna start... You get my point. And African countries are extremely different from one another. Why have we made so many kinds of talents difficult to support? I understand why generations of African families learned to value certainty, stability. When money is limited, when employment is frightening, choosing a career is not always an exercise in self-discovery. Sometimes it is survival. But I also think that we should be careful about turning survival strategies into permanent definitions of what a successful life is allowed to look like. Because again, Africa already consumes the work of creative people every single day. We listen to them, we watch them, we wear what they design, we photograph our lives through visual languages creatives help shape. We celebrate them when they win. And then sometimes, when somebody is still young enough for that creativity to look uncertain, we tell them to be realistic. A society cannot keep celebrating the people who beat impossible odds and then use that as evidence that the odds were fair. For every creative whose talent eventually found an audience, there are people whose ability never got far enough for us to know what they could have become. And maybe they would not have all made it, but that's not the point. I'm not saying every African child should abandon school and start a stream page or YouTube channel tomorrow. Please stay in school. That's not what I'm saying. And I don't think medicine, engineering, law are less valuable because creativity deserves more respect. I just think we have built a very narrow, tight definition of what a sensible future for the African youth can look like. And maybe the goal isn't to tell every young person to recklessly follow their dreams. Maybe it's to build enough pathways that pursuing something you are genuinely good at doesn't automatically have to feel reckless, because talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. There is a difference between failing after being given a real chance and never having enough support to find out what you could have become. I would love to hear your thoughts and shared experiences down in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in my next one. Bye! Also guys, look at my makeup. What? I ate that. I've been delving into eyeshadow more and more recently and I love it. The looks are eating.